Okay, as I wait for the PowerPoint to start up. It's part of my 8 minutes. All right. If I sing, can I get a little more time? Okay. So as Chris pointed out when he first started speaking, gun violence remains a very, very serious problem in the United States. It's well known that cities experience higher levels of gun violence than suburbs and rural areas. And people understand that particular neighborhoods, especially those that are suffering from concentrated disadvantage problems, excellent, generate even higher levels of violence. But one thing that often gets neglected in conversations about gun violence is that even within those neighborhoods is a story of further concentration. Most people in neighborhoods that are suffering from gun violence problems are not involved in gun violence at all. In fact, it's a very small number of people who are very well known to the community, very well known to law enforcement agencies, who get caught up in disputes involving status, respect, and other concerns that generate a lot of the violence. And most areas of these neighborhoods are often gun violence free, even though the whole neighborhood, if you look at it as a count, you'll say, okay, well, there's a fair amount of gun violence, but it's really concentrated in very specific places within these neighborhoods. And it's important, I think, to include academics in the discussion, and that's part of the case I'm going to be making to you, that academics, when they form partnerships with cities, with community-based organizations, and especially with law enforcement agencies, you can learn a lot about what's going on in a city that will lead to more focused interventions that are better positioned to generate positive gun violence gains. Some of the work I'm just going to briefly go through is work I've been doing in Boston with the Boston Police Department, the City of Boston, U.S. Attorney's Office, and other agencies in Boston. And that has been supported by the federal government through their Project Safe Neighborhoods initiative and more recently the Bureau of Justice Assistance Smart Policing Initiative. Oh, wrong way. Okay, and I'm sorry it's a little bit small, but this slide speaks to the issue of places. The map in the top corner there, that's a typical hotspot map. People in the room have probably seen it 100 times over. You look at hotspots on a yearly basis, and you generally see that some small portion of places, and by places I mean streets, I mean particular street block faces, intersections, clusters of addresses rather than larger units such as police beats, generate a lot of the violence. One thing that we did in Boston was that we counted gun assaults, fatal and non-fatal gun assaults, to specific street block faces and intersections over a 29-year period. And we did some fancy statistical modeling, which I'll spare you all. But what we found was quite striking, and it replicates some of the work that David Weisbert has done in Seattle. We found that only 5% of all the street block faces and intersections generated 74% of all the shootings in the city of Boston over a 29-year period. The worst 60 of these very, very small intersections and block faces experienced over 1,000 shootings during that time period. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a resident in one of those neighborhoods, faced with all that trauma and stress on a daily basis. But it really does talk to, if you can control a small amount of geography in a city, you can really impact citywide crime rates. The graph there shows you the blue in the red group represents that 5%. Some of these places are incredibly stable, some are more volatile. But as you can see, this is going over time. The big peak is 1990, that the entire youth gun violence epidemic and gun violence epidemic in general in Boston really took place on only 5% of the city's streets and intersections. The ramp up, the good times during the 1990s, and some of the modest increase that we experienced in the early part of the 2000s all happened in only 5% of the city. That's a remarkable figure. I think really challenges us to think about, well, what's going on beyond the neighborhood? Clearly, neighborhood effects are important and need to be addressed, but places within neighborhoods also need to be addressed. Same thing with people. A very small number of people generate a bulk of gun violence problems. In Boston, it happens to be a gang thing. In other cities, call them criminally active groups, drug selling crews, friendship cliques. It doesn't really matter. You have this real strong group dynamic that's going on. And in Boston, that's a social network analysis that I work on and off with colleagues. That just shows how 60 gangs have identifiable conflicts and alliances with each other. And some of the important parts of that is only about 1% of the city's youth between the ages of 14 and 24 participate in gangs in the city of Boston, but these ongoing gang conflicts generate at least half of all the gun homicides, and gang members are involved in more than 2/3 of all the shootings, non-fatal and fatal put together, because there are lots of different types of shooting problems out there, and gang members are central to all of them. So it's incredibly concentrated. And community knows who these individuals are. Criminal justice system's very well aware of these individuals. When I looked at homicide victims in the city of Boston, and this is a common finding everywhere, about 3/4 of the victims and 90% of the offenders were known to the criminal justice system before the homicide event. And it wasn't like they were just a little bit known to the criminal justice system. On average, they had 12 arraignments for many different types of crime. In the gang literature, this is known as cafeteria-style offending, very, very opportunistic. The point of that demonstrates that there are many opportunities to intervene if these people are in and out of prison, on probation, very well known to the community, well known to social service providers, well known to cops on the beat. It's not a mystery what's going on. These gang disputes are very identifiable. When somebody gets shot, it's pretty clear where the retaliation is going to come back. So a lot of this stuff is very, very well known and very well understood and highly concentrated. So there are real clear implications for prevention practice, I think. And even within that 1%, it's even further concentrated. The bar chart here represents one gang in particular in 2006. They're called the Lucerne Street Dogs, and at that point in time, they were like the Hollywood of gangs in the city of Boston. They would roll as many as 40 or 50 deep, but when you looked at the number of shootings they were involved in, this one group accounted for, in 2006, 10% of all the shootings. And it wasn't all of the kids in the group. I mean, actually, a lot of the kids in the group were pretty good kids that, under the right circumstances, you could really work with. They're what I call situationally dangerous. Depending on the circumstances and the pressures that they find themselves in, they could be capable of violence. But you did have 6 guys in that group who were stone-cold shooters. And these 6 guys generated 10% of all the shootings in the city of Boston. So even within the concentration of that 1% of these individuals who are involved in these very high-risk networks, you have further concentration of folks who are particularly dangerous that really need to come to the attention of law enforcement. So in terms of, oops, wrong way. What types of strategies? I think there is a developing, thankfully through the efforts of NIJ and the COPS office, a real developing knowledge of what works in preventing crime. And there is some best practices, both proven programs and programs that you need a little bit more research on that seem pretty promising based on what we know about the nature of problems and some decent evaluation evidence. But I think the point really is that too many jurisdictions just take programs that they see happening in other places, like, hey, Chicago's doing something really interesting with their Project Safe Neighborhood initiative. We should just do that here, without taking a step back and appreciating the context of the way that program is being implemented in that city. And that's where I think this upfront analysis really makes a big difference, because if you're going to adopt good ideas from different places, you really need to be sensitive to local capacities, local politics, local conditions, and violent crime problems. Even though there's important parallels across cities, such as the concentration, you do have important differences. So analysis is incredibly important up front to make sure you get the most bang for your buck. Some promising strategies: pulling levers focused deterrence strategies, where you combine criminal justice, social service, and community-based action on the small number of people who are generating these problems. There's a growing body of very solid evidence for that approach. Hotspots policing: there are many rigorous evaluations now of hotspots policing initiatives, basically getting cops on the places they need to be. And I really think the forefront of hotspots policing is trying to change the characteristics of those places and get the community more involved in changing the conditions of those places in order to prevent violence. Prisoner reentry programs, as I said, given that these high-risk individuals are in and out of prison under probation, these are all opportunities to intervene. You know, if folks are coming out of prison and going back into neighborhoods who are likely to be shooters, you want to do what you can to ensure that they make a successful transition back into the community and don't end up being killed or killing somebody. And there's a growing body of evidence on that. And also keeping guns out of high-risk hands. As Hubert was saying, a lot of these individuals who are getting caught misusing guns shouldn't have them in the first place. And I think there really needs to be, you know, more efforts to understand the sources of guns. You know, that include the analysis of ATF trace data, but can go beyond that, include state-level data and other sources of information, such as survey data on where people are getting guns from. And also ballistics imaging and analysis. The NIBIN program, I think, is an important innovation where you need to know, since guns are durable goods and being used repeatedly, how they're traveling around these different criminal networks, and how can we better focus our enforcement efforts to get those guns out of their hands. So that's 8 minutes.